Okay, so I'm talking about working with unions, and I'm going to talk about the legislation that the National Restaurant Association and the National Labor Regulatory Board have been fighting over in the past 6 months. The National Labor Regulatory Board came up with new rules that would allow for an ambush election rule, which basically amounts to they can vote on a motion, and if the vote passes, then 10 days later the union is forced to vote on it. And the National Restaurant Association did not like this new rule because it gave employers much less time to work with unions and debate and try to find a compromise. The average time between a motion and between a vote before that was about 41 days, so it moved up the timetable quite a bit. The other thing that was in this piece of legislation that the National Restaurant Association was not happy with was it allowed for the formation of mini unions, which basically meant that any small group working at a restaurant could vote and support the union without those who didn't support the union being allowed to vote in opposition. And this basically would create a problem because restaurants could be formed of many mini unions, depending on the size of the place, and it would put the employers in the position of having to negotiate with multiple unions, which would be a huge waste of time and resources for employers. The next part of the dispute between the two came up again on November 30th, when the National Restaurant Association once again pushed for all Congress members to vote for the bill. As of the most recent news, on April 23rd, the vote is still going through committee, and it seems that based on the history of these types of bills, there's only about a 36% chance that it'll get pushed through and passed. So obviously the National Restaurant Association and other groups associated with the restaurant business are trying to push hard to get more people to support this. I chose these articles to do my presentation on because I thought while there's a lot you can look at about working with unions at a local level, I thought it was somewhat interesting to look at what happens at a national level with the National Restaurant Association and the National Labor Regulatory Board disagreeing on how unions should go about this. And even if maybe individuals don't have a huge amount of power over what happens, it shows that you really need to be aware of what's going on in the news and what's going on legally, because these changes could really affect how employers have to work with unions and with their employees. One other thing I wanted people to take away from these articles is that even if you work at a small business, the food service industry represents the second largest business in the U.S., employing about 1 out of every 10 workers. So even though you may not see these workings on a small scale, there are always going to be laws trying to regulate and trying to change the way business works. And since it is a large industry, it gets a lot of focus from Congress and from political groups, such as the National Restaurant Association and the National Labor Regulatory Board. So there are a lot of special interest groups involved in the food service industry, and so it's important to keep on top of what's happening. Finally, one of the reasons I wanted to share these articles with everyone is because I really hadn't heard anything about this until I started looking on websites. So even if it wasn't something that grabbed major news, it can really affect the way that the economy is going to work in general and for the food service industry in particular. I think that's a pretty good sum up of what I wanted to say. If you have any questions about it, just post and let me know, and I'll try to get back to you as quick as possible. Thank you.